And we're joined this morning by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend Justin Welby. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Every death we know hurts. We've heard many stories this morning over the last few weeks as well. 100,000 seems like a huge figure, doesn't it? Hard to get your head around. I wonder whether you could try and help us this morning as a nation, try and come to terms with that sense of loss.
I think you're doing it in exactly the right way, and your contributors earlier were doing it in the right way. We have to think of 100,000 individuals, 100,000 families, 100,000 people who had friends. There's millions who will be affected by that number, but each of them is of infinite value in the sight of God. And that is the Christian reality that's deep in our heritage in this country. And the best way to do it is, as we've just done, is to think of those who we know who've died, and then to remember that's all over the country, and to seek to do everything we can to serve them and to love them and to be in solidarity with them, which includes things like keeping to the rules about lockdown, and when we're offered them, taking the vaccinations.
Hope is something I feel this morning that many people are searching for, Archbishop. Many have got in contact with us talking about the vaccine, and the vaccine is providing hope for many going forward. Where do you, at a time like this, where do you look for hope? Where do you find hope?
Well, surprisingly enough, at least I hope not too surprisingly enough, I find hope in the fact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the central core belief, that God came and shared our sorrows. He's in the middle of this mess. He's alongside us. He died and he conquered death, and death no longer has the last word, that God has the last word. And so that's where I begin to find hope, and where I see it worked out is in the signs of what is good, of the love that we pass on, that we receive and pass on to other people, that I see in hospitals, that I see in neighbours caring for each other, this wonderful outflowing of community support that we've seen over the last 10 months. And I see hope there. And I see hope, thirdly, in this growing determination to build better in the future, to come back and say, we don't want to live in a country where there is inequality of health, where there's inequalities and injustices. We are going to do things that work better for all of us. I think there are many signs of hope that these deaths will not be in vain, but will lead to a better country.
Lots of people are experiencing loss at the moment. I know you've experienced your own sense of loss in this pandemic as well. Can you tell us a bit about that this morning and how that has affected you?
Well, I had a very close friend in his 40s, a bishop who I'd worked very closely with in an area of Ebola and militia warfare, who died over the space of 3 or 4 days, obviously in northeast Congo without much treatment. They didn't have any facilities to look after him. And he texted me or WhatsApped me just an hour before his death. And I just remember that awful sense, as we do. He was an immensely close friend. I owed him so much. And that awful sense, you can't ring up and say, hey, how are things? I've got this problem. What do you think? And it's so much more when it's family, immediate family who you think, oh, mum would love to hear that, but mum's not there. Or one of the children or whatever it is. That's the way grief comes in. And grief lies to us, death lies to us and says there is no future. There is no way around this. There's no way through this. You'll never be able to rebuild your life, but we do rebuild our lives a day at a time in solidarity with one another. And I would say in prayer and lament and crying out to God in anger, but also finding his love when we do so.
You talked a bit about prayer there, Archbishop, and I'm sure many people will be watching this morning and through what they've experienced either in their own lives over the last few months or in the lives of others, or through watching the news or reading newspapers or hearing reflections of other people, they might hear you talk about prayer this morning and they might think, well, in the situation we're all going through at the moment, where is God at the moment? What's God doing? How do you begin to answer a question like that?
Well, we've been there many years ago now when one of our children died in a car crash and lived a few days and then died in hospital. And anyone who gives an easy, quick answer to that doesn't know what they're talking about, frankly. Beware of the snappy answer. What I remember is the presence of God in grief. It wasn't easy, it was awful, but there was a profound sense that when we called out to God, that somehow things happened. And prayer can be as simple, and I've prayed this with people and heard them pray it at the end of their lives or in the depths of grief. I don't even know if you exist, God, and if you do, I'm really angry. Even I've heard someone say, I hate what you're doing to me, but help. And we find that in the Psalms, we find that in the Bible, and God is there. And I don't know how, but we see in Jesus that God got right in the middle of the mess with us and is alongside.
During the course of this pandemic as well, you've been working, haven't you, as an assistant chaplain at St Thomas's Hospital. I wonder, through your conversations with some of the people there, have you been inspired by speaking to them, and what have you learnt from some of, I suppose, talking to them and what they've been through, and maybe they've taught you things in the same way that you've taught them some things as well?
Well, I don't know if I've taught them anything. It's the best. It's just been the greatest gift that they've given me to be able to go in and be with them. You learn about courage. I was very recently with an ICU team going on shift, and that sense of determination, of compassion, of professionalism, but not cold professionalism, but a professionalism that comes from deep within their hearts. That teaches me about love. I was that same evening praying with a woman who'd had COVID right towards the end of her life. And all she could do was squeeze my hand. And again, that sense of faith and comfort, my own spirits were lifted. With that same evening, people who just had very prem babies, who just were calling out for strength and comfort and someone to be alongside them. The chaplaincies are working like, I can't describe how hard they're working. The staff are working beyond anything that any of us can imagine. They're bearing these burdens. They bear the burdens for us and with us. It's been utterly inspiring.
Can I ask you this morning, Archbishop, about the issue of regret? Many people will have watched the Prime Minister yesterday saying that he took full responsibility for what had happened, and that they'd done everything they could as a government to try and protect the UK from coronavirus. And I'm sure a regret is something which does lie in the hearts of many politicians at the moment who've made decisions over the last few months. But also there are people who'll be watching this morning who have personal regret over things they haven't done, over relatives they weren't able to say goodbye to. I know it's a sort of huge issue to deal with, but it feels like on a morning when we are looking at such a huge and horrible milestone of 100,000 deaths, how do politicians, how do people who have made some of those decisions which they look back on and think they could have done things differently, how do we deal with regret as a nation?
I think individually, one by one, and you always hear this around deaths. If only I'd said that. I didn't say sorry. We left on bad terms last time we met. I never expected that we wouldn't meet again, etc. All those sorts of things. So for the individual, where there's a genuine cause for regret, take it to God. confess it. Confess it to a close and loving friend who you can trust who you can trust not to judge you, and just acknowledge it. That's how you face these things. Most people feel regrets, and they don't need to be honest. It's just that sense of, was there something I could do? And the answer is usually no. So be alongside people who are feeling that, on telephone calls and other ways, just reassuring them. And for the politicians, I would say the same. I pray for our politicians each day, our political leaders, including the Prime Minister, because they're human. They're deeply, deeply human. There will be things they've got wrong because they're human. Today is a day for solidarity and support. There'll be inquiries in the future. That is quite right. But today is for solidarity, and they will have regrets. I'd say to all of them, again, take it to God in prayer, confess it, and we have to move on and get the next decision right and care for people better as a result. But all these things have to be faced in the light. There's a wonderful verse in the Bible, towards the end of the Bible. John the Apostle says, walk in the light. Walking in the light means we look at what is really there. We acknowledge it, and we let the light and love of Christ heal it and bring us new life.
We appreciate your time this morning. That's the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, speaking to us live on BBC Breakfast this morning.
And thank you for so many of